Hello everyone, I'm George from Ireland. Well, there is the Trump-Putin summit not to look forward to. Meant to come up next Friday. Will that be the 15th? No, yeah, the 15th of August to take place in Alaska. Initially, it was announced it would be United Arab Emirates because I thought it might be Turkey, some neutral country, but actually in the United States, that surprised everyone. I thought of other possible locations, like in Southeast Asia, where Trump had met Kim Jong Un, Singapore, or someone like that. But no, Singapore is a sanctioning country in Russia. But this summit with Putin is a small win for Putin, whatever the outcome. The very fact is it's happening whilst the war is going on. He's got the prestige of Trump parleying with him on equal terms. Remember, Trump, who was going to bring peace within 24 hours, a massive lie. And if you believe that, you're probably thick enough to be a Trumpist. So anybody with two brain cells realize that that's impossible. Here we are, how many months later, about 7 months later, and it's nowhere near happening. And that Russia's been about to agree to a ceasefire, really wants a ceasefire, but, and hasn't done it, has simply intensified things. Their 3 days ceasefires are not ceasefire at all. You see utter chicanery of Putin, the just infinite mendacity of Putin. But of course, in a sense, he's met his match in Trump. Trump, who's will just as fire hose people with lies. Wow, it's the post-truth age. So he's inviting him to the United States. Now, Trump is presumably dim enough to think that's some sort of success for him because it's on home turf. Okay, he's probably too ignorant to realize, obviously, Alaska's part of the Russian Empire till sold to the United States in 1867. The Seward's Folly. Some Americans opposed the U.S. Secretary of State's plan to purchase from the Ruskies. Of course, 50 years later came the October Revolution, eventually the Cold War, and obviously the Russians were kicking themselves. They rued the day they sold that. It seemed to be almost useless, just a place for fur trapping. They thought the British might take it in a future war, and the United Kingdom could very easily have seized it in the Crimean War. It was a big mistake of the UK not to do that. There are only a couple of thousand Russian troops there. It was been very, very easy to annex, and a few thousand troops to seize that would have made very little difference to fighting in the Crimea. But anyway, so there's some Russians who still claim it. It says, "Oh, that's void. No, it's ours. We don't care." Remember what Putin said: any land that a Russian soldier ever set foot on is Russia's forever. That's dangerous. There were Russian troops in Paris at the end of the Napoleonic Wars. They've been all over the Europe. So he is a hyper nationalist. He's ultra aggressive and an expansionist. So he's very, very worrisome. And this is not just about Ukraine. I've been saying to us, blue in the face, Ukraine will not be the last victim of Russian aggression if they're allowed to get away with this. Um, Remember, Vladimir Vladimirovich Putin was sanctioned by the United States in 2022 with the beginning of his illegal action, and yet they're breaking their own sanctions to invite him there. No access to the financial system. Presumably, he's got to have some finances to subsist in the United States for a few days. I mean, is he going to bring us all food? No Russian planes to fly to the United States or over United States airspace. Now, they made an exemption at least once, and they're doing it again. So, all terribly worrying. And why? Okay, so no preconditions. They haven't stopped the aerial attacks. They've intensified them, and Trump's got absolutely nothing in return for these major concessions to the other sides. The very fact the Russians are quite happy the way the talks went with Witkoff is obviously ominous. So it looks like Trump is minded to agree. Well, we'll recognize these 5 illegally occupied regions as Russian sovereign territory or something like that. And then Russia will agree not to attack Ukraine. But of course they'll attack Ukraine. How ignorant can you be? You'd have to be especially staggeringly stupid to trust Putin, who's broken every agreement he ever signed. Anyway, so President Putin, he said that he spoke to Xi Jinping and to Narendra Modi before this, and that they've tried to broker peace. Of course, we know that China is neutral towards Russia and neutral against Ukraine. And the Chinese economy has been crucial in sustaining Russia's war effort, selling some of the components they need, and actually whole Chinese weapon systems, as well as trade. And Russia's had to sell them oil at mates rates, sell the Indians oil at mates rates and things like that. So it's going to take place there. And Trump announced it on Truth Social. Um, Okay, so Trump has even said there'll be some swapping of territories to the betterment of Ukraine and Russia. Yeah, right. So Ukraine holds virtually nothing of Russia. Russia held about 20% of Russia's sovereign territory. Why on earth should Ukraine give away what's rightfully theirs? Wow, wow. So it's sickening, but I'm sorry to say unsurprising. So that's it. Flying across the Bering Strait. Now the Russians not confirmed when this is going to take place all the time. They could of course change it last minute. I think Putin wouldn't do that. I think that might piss off Trump too much, and he's obviously hacked him off a few times before, let him down. You know, Vladimir Putin, who said he let's have a one-on meeting with Zelensky a few months ago in Istanbul and didn't go when Zelensky did. So it proves that he's a bad faith actor. It proves that he's utterly untrustworthy. Goodness. So no ceasefire so far, because obviously Putin thinks things are going his way on the battlefield, which they are slightly. They are gaining ground, but they can't sustain losses of troops and assets at this level indefinitely. This is the summer offensive. This is the prime time to making headway, and they're not making very much headway. You know, okay, it's maybe more than Ukraine in the summer of 2023. It's much less than say Ukraine in September 2022 or last August when they burst into Kursk. Goodness. So we know that Russia's parameters, when there were talks held with a Ukrainian delegation in Turkey in July, the Russian negotiating team said they would demand major territorial concessions. We know if they were given, they would simply attack again and go even further. Well, there's been Minsk 1, Minsk 2, they've renated and everything. So that Kiev had to give up the land that the Ukrainians control anyway. They have to stop military support. Now, why on earth would you say to no to military support, which they urgently need? You know, why do they need this military support? Because Russia's attacking them. So there's always victim blaming, always turning it around. The aggressors say, "Oh, you're a threat to us." Anyway, so it's revolting. This bullying, this bigotry, this utter dishonesty, cruelty. What naivete of Trump. You can see why he's such a failure in business, the biggest loser, to have lost tens of billions of dollars. Anyway, so I remember in June 2021, Joe Biden met President Putin in Geneva, Switzerland. So that was in coronavirus. Coronavirus has been on for over a year, was a bit less serious. Now, Trump hasn't met Putin since the G20 summit in Japan. That was in Trump's first term, but they have spoken on the phone several times since in Trump's second term. So, yeah, the fact this going ahead is very good for Russia. And remember, he's an international on the International Criminal Court's wanted list, the arrest warrants out for him. And the United States was instrumental in creating that court, signed the Rome Statute of the Court, but the US Congress didn't ratify it. So, yeah, international law, it's good for other people, but not for Americans. The United States has been part of some of these international tribunals, one at Nuremberg, one for the Far East, encouraging for Rwanda, the former Yugoslavia. But no, 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 no. They won't hold their own people to the standards they hold everybody else. You see the flagrant hypocrisy. Now, the Ruskies got to hand it to them. They at least weren't really behind the ICC to begin with. Putin is the world's most prolific child trafficker, having kidnapped roughly 35,000 Ukrainian children. And now they're offering them for adoption, people with good parents, living parents, and so on. So President Zelensky has plaintively said that Ukraine must participate in these negotiations about its future. I'm quite slightly worried that Putin will know how to smarm and charm Trump. Trump is thick enough to be played by him. He's got all his recruitable vulnerabilities. There may be the PP tape or whatever, maybe financially beholden to him. We know that Trump always chickens out, that he's invertebrate, he's feeble, he's mentally subnormal, and then that he might betray the Ukrainians because of whatever Putin says. So it's all very worrying. Whatever the outcome is not going to improve Ukraine's situation. I mean, at best, it'll make no difference, but it could make it a lot worse. So I'm sorry to say there are a few grounds for optimism.